I'm Nancy Tupper-Ling, and I'm going to have multiple hats tonight because I'm supposed to be on the author panel, but then one of the moderators got sick, so I'm going to moderate too. And then I also work for the Blue Bunny, so I got that hat on. And what else? Boston Authors Club board member, so you can ask me any question about any of those topics. Let's see. So just a little bit, feel free to wear a mask. We are trying to have the air flowing here. We would love you to buy books, and we would also love to say thank you to Peter Reynolds and the Blue Bunny Bookstore for having the Boston Authors Club here. And Margie over there, and Margie. Cam, if you want a drink, Cam's still open there for a little bit. I'm not sure how much longer, but feel free. There's also wine over there. Might make it even more enjoyable for all of us. Okay. So anyway, feel free to get up and move around, and let's see what else. Oh, yes, and please buy books, which people have been doing. So a little bit about the Boston Authors Club and its history. It was started in 1899 by Julia Ward Howe, and very cool female president, first female president. And then they've had, of course, amazing authors like Mark Twain and Willa Cather and Isaac Asimov and you. So tonight you can sign up and have a free membership through the end of the year. We would love to have you. There's a little, Sarah had the little sign up sheet, and it's just, a very cool association, not elite. You don't have to be published. We would love to have you. One thing that the Boston Globe said about the Boston Authors Club that I thought was very cool is it's defending books in the age of distraction, which I thought was a good mission for them to have. We have the Julia Ward Howe Awards, which are for published authors. That's an annual event. Right now they're judging. They have 4 categories. Let's see, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and young readers. So that's cool for published authors. And then a couple of years ago we started the Discovery Awards, and we had 2 years with picture books, and Lisa was our first winner for that, Lisa Perrone. So that's a cool connection too. And we wanted to hear from her point of view about journey from there and everything. So we'll get on to that tonight. I'd love to dive in. This is our fifth time of having the panel, and we have 10 questions. And then we'd like to take questions from you two. I figure we'll go this way and then we'll come back. So if that works for the cameraman, for Nate. Yeah. All right, so there are many different types of children's books. We have the picture book, fiction, non-fiction, chapter book, graphic novel, middle grade, and young adult. I write anthologies or put anthologies together. That's another aspect. So if you could tell us your name and what you love to write, which one of those genres, or all of them?
Sure. So I'm Lisa Marshall-Perrone, and I write picture books and middle grade. And the way I got into writing for kids is that I'd been trying to write a novel for many years, and I would get several chapters in, and I was just feeling stuck. And I was writing it as an adult novel, but it was inspired by some family history. I come from grandparents and great-grandparents who were coal miners, and it was set in Pennsylvania coal country, and I just couldn't get it finished. And then my daughter was reading a middle grade novel a few years ago, and I went, yes, my main character is 12. This needs to be a middle grade novel. And it still took me another 1.5 years to write the book, to finish it, but I did. And that one is on sub now. And as we'll see, historical fiction. And I also have a picture book that is coming out next year that's nonfiction. And 2 more, but that haven't been announced yet.
And what was the one that won the Discovery
And the one
Award?
that won the Discovery Award was a nonfiction, or some people would call it informational fiction, called Meet the Moons, that is about the moons in our solar system. And that one was inspired by, my husband is an earth and planetary scientist, and he was saying one of the things he studies is one of the moons of Titan. And one of my kids said, there's more than one moon? What? What do you mean there's more than one moon? And that's where that manuscript came from.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
And can I jump in to tell you that there were many, many entries into this contest, and the best.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Mia Wengen. I write picture books and middle grade. So I came into it very like circuitous. I was a mom blogger for about 13 years, and then from that I just started blogging on children's books. I always had a love for children's books, but also my oldest was like behind in literacy, so I would just read, I don't know, like 100 picture books because I had 3 kids, and you could sit, 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and we could read a picture book, and everyone's entertained. And then from that, I realized there was a real lack of diversity in children's books, so I started focusing my blog on that. And then another mom blogger reached out and said, like, we should do something about it. So we started a nonprofit, Multicultural Children's Book Day, which is in its 10th year. And then by doing all this and just kind of watching all my blogger friends start to put books out into the world, I was like, wait, because I'm an entrepreneur with an MBA in entrepreneurial marketing. I was like, wait, I think I created an opening for myself. And so I had people would always ask me like, hey, what's a good, do you know like an Asian author? All kinds of questions like that. And so I get emailed, recommend a book or recommend, whatever. And so I would get this one guy who would say like, do you know Native American middle grade nonfiction? And I was like, absolutely I do, here's a list. And then one day he was like, do you know an Asian American like middle grade nonfiction? I was like, wait, I wrote a picture book that hasn't been published, like I could do it. And he was like, okay, you have to do like a bake-off, and we're gonna have you, like a bunch of people compete for it. And I was like, I'll throw my hat in the ring. And so I ended up working with a book packager for a nonfiction book for Scholastic, but it's like only through the flyers. And then I ended up entering a New Voices competition for Lee and Low, and it's for Sumo Joe. Like I do like a children's book, like school visit of like raise your hand if you think I won, and like all the kids raise their hand, and I was like, no, I lost. I actually lost. But I got a letter that said, hey, you were a finalist. We really liked it. Would you like free editorial help? And I was like, yes, I would pay for editorial help. And so I did multiple revisions with them, and then they ended up acquiring it. And so, that's my story.
Very cool.
Great. Janet.
My name is Janet Costa-Bates, and I write picture books, evidently chapter books, and kind of sort of middle grade novels. I've written as soon as I learned how, but I didn't really figure out that I wanted to do picture books until my sons were born. And I absolutely fell in love starting to read picture books while they were still infants in my arms. And then I had no time to write because my sons were born. I had 2 active sons, as in, why walk around a piece of furniture when you could hurdle it? So I was busy and tired, but I did do some writing. And I got a few magazine stories published, which kind of kept me going. Every time I was ready to quit, there was something there. Though I did legit quit one time, and then a story poured into my head. Literally, one morning, the words, fully formed sentences, started coming in. And so I wrote them down, and it actually won the Highlights Fiction Contest at the time. I thought, okay, so this is a sign, I should keep going, and I did. I also entered Lee and Low's New Voices contest, and I did not win, but I did get the honor award. No publication came along, or publishing offer came with the honor award, but they said, if you're willing to revise, we're willing to consider it. And I said, yes, yes. And that was Seaside Dream, which was my first published book. Time for Bed, Old House just came out in the fall. And then I had worked for years, literally years, on a middle grade novel, which I was told this isn't working. By many editors, the plot, the voice is great, characters are great, the plot is terrible, basically. And Christian Trimmer, who was at the time with Simon & Schuster, I think, said, you've got a great setup for a chapter book series. So I listened, and I now have 3 chapter books coming out starting in the fall. So, you start on one route, and sometimes you end up on another route and realize this was the right road. This was the exact right road.
Is it with Krista Trimmer?
No, I'm with Candlewick.
Oh.
So.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Peter Reynolds, and I am owner of this bookstore that you're hanging out in. So thank you for coming tonight. By the way, we opened the bookstore 20 years ago. This year we'll be going into our 20th year. And thank you. Yeah. And I looked around our town, and we did not have a bookstore. But we did have a book up on Route 1, but that was not, like legit. It was like whatever they found, remainder stuff. And of course, I had just published a book you might know called The Dot. And I was like running around to bookstores trying to find my book. And I came back to my hometown thinking, I'm like, I wonder where, is anyone selling my book? And of course found out there really wasn't any legitimate bookstore. So we opened up the Blue Bunny. And I create picture books. Some people call them children's books, but I call them picture books because I think that picture books are for all ages. And I sort of intentionally write for all ages, especially more for adults, because kids are brilliant, they get it. They've kind of got everything we wish we had. Right? They know how to play, and they still have an active imagination, and I feel like as we get older, we begin to pack all that away, and we kind of get serious. And for some of us, we get very serious, and then we also get really, really busy. And I thought, I know that for me, that was my journey. I got really super busy, and fortunately, I had a daughter, Sarah, and when you've got a little one begging for stories, we had a couple of books on the shelf, and we would read them over and over again. And I was so bored of these books. I'm like, please, not that one, not that one. And they were picture books with too many words. So I would do editing on the fly. I would just edit on the fly. I would kind of make up my own version. And she didn't read yet, so she wasn't on. Later on, she's like, you're not reading it right. And then one night, I just thought, I'm not even going to use the book. I said, can I tell you a story? And she said, please. And that was a real moment for me, like lightning bolt moment, that she didn't want a book, she wanted a story. She also wanted to spend time with her dad. And so I just started making up stories. And after I tucked her into bed, I'm like, actually it was pretty good. That made sense. That made some sense. So I started writing them down. And so one of the books, one of the stories, I put into a blank journal, and I gave it to her for her birthday. And that was kind of there were like a couple of things that kind of launched things for me. But I had been working at an educational software company called Tom Snyder Productions in Cambridge. So I was working with this master teacher doing really brilliant things in school, in a private school called Shady Hill School. And I started spending more and more time with teachers and realizing that in public education in this country, it's not private school, right? There's a lot of boxing going on, putting kids in boxes, and there were a lot of kids suffering. And I thought to myself, I was actually one of those kids. My twin brother he was a good student, right? He could focus on all this stuff that, I could not tolerate boredom. So I made my own fun in my head. I was drawing and dreaming, and then I got to a certain point in my 30s, and I said, the public education system in this country needs a major overhaul. It needs to respect teachers and give them freedom, and then it occurred to me that the curriculum was this kind of wild guess at what kids needed, but we treated it very seriously. And you got A's and B's and C's, and the whole thing didn't make sense to me. And I thought there was one question they forgot to ask throughout all of school, and that is, who are you? When did they ever ask you? I know that that's a warm-up thing. What did you do for your summer vacation? That was the closest they ever got. And I thought, I would love to change things. And this story flowed out. I opened up my journal midnight, and I started writing about this little boy lost in a swamp, trying to figure his way out. And that became the North Star book. And I believed in that story so much that I said, I'm not going to wait around for a publisher. I'm going to publish it myself. And so I published the North Star myself. This is back in the old days. This is 25 plus years ago. So it was very expensive, and you had to order thousands of copies at a time. So this truck arrived with pallets, and there were all these boxes. And I'm like, what did I do? And I just, my daughter's college education is all spent, and then we had to figure out what to do. And we had an event at the Boston Children's Museum, and I invited teachers, and they fell in love with the story. They got it, and they realized like this story was about the liberation of teachers and kids to follow their own path. And within a year, we had sold all of them, and then we had a business entrepreneur, a billionaire from Texas, who flew on his jet to come see me, and he said, I love this book. This is my philosophy. I will buy 5,000 copies, and I want you to give them away. Just go into Boston, into challenged neighborhoods, just give them away. Don't tell me who, I don't need to know. And he sat there with his checkbook, and he wrote a check out, and that allowed me to print another run. And eventually we said, I'm like, I don't want to be a publisher. I want to create. So Candlewick Press ended up republishing the North Star. But that got things going for me. And Candlewick then asked, what else do you have up your sleeve? And that's when I told them about this idea for the dot issue, Sky Color. And over lunch they said, we'll take them all. And but that was because I had the confidence in my story and my mission. And I put myself out there. And I said, I know that in my heart, the world needs this book. And, I hope tonight, that this will affirm what's in your heart. If you've got a story to tell. And I'm a big believer that every voice matters. And all my work is about encouraging everybody to put their story out there for the world.
Well, this kind of dovetails with that. I'm just curious, how do we know as authors when our manuscript is ready, and who helps us along the way? Because this may be helpful for other people who are writing. What resources, what writing groups we belong to, what critique groups or whatever. So maybe I'll start with Peter and then work our way back this way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was born with a twin, so born with my best friend, and as long as you've got one other person that loves you and will listen to you and support you, your critical friend, because I can't just say, it's awesome, everything's awesome, because, it's not awesome the first time it comes spilling out. But I, over the years, I've tried, writers' retreats, and I joined SCBWI, which is a great organization, Society for Children's Book Authors and Illustrators, and it's a great resource. But I find that I've got, like I'm a little rebel, I'm just off doing my own thing. I almost don't want anyone. But I think you can also get too much advice. And I see it happen a lot. And there are writers who are terrified because they feel like they're doing it wrong. When I wrote the North Star book, all I did was I took a stack of note cards from Bob Slate Stationers. It was like a really nice oak colored, and I just took my Sharpie marker and I just wrote the whole darn thing out, including all the words. So it wasn't typeset; it was my handwriting. And I ended up with this 120-page book, not knowing that a typical children's book or a picture book is 32, 40, in multiples of 4. I had this crazy big book, and I'm glad I didn't know what I was doing because people liked it. So. How about you?
Well, to add on to that, I'm a career coach in my other life, and I always tell the students, whether we're talking about resumes, cover letters, job hunting, I tell them know the rules enough to know when to break them. So there you go. Know when to break them, because maybe you are not doing things wrong. Maybe you're doing them differently, and differently can be perfectly fine. But you have to have enough of an understanding about the industry to know what is what rules are breakable and how, when you should and when you shouldn't. So What was the question?
I'm seeing Vincent can't hear back there, so maybe we can talk a little louder too.
Okay, okay.
When do you know your manuscript is ready, and who helps you along the way with it?
Okay. Community in this writing world is everything. It's everything. I can't imagine where I'd be or what I would have done without the writing community. Peter mentioned Society of Book Writers, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and that has been huge. They've been through a couple of bumpy years, but it looks like they're pulling it back together, and it has been absolutely huge. The first time I heard about it was years ago, a couple of decades ago, and there was this conference in Portland. And I thought, I have to be there. I have to. I'd gotten the writing bug. I needed to be there.
That's where we met, that you forget that we met.
I've known Nancy all of my life. I'm sure of it. I never met Nancy. I've always known Nancy. I don't remember meeting Nancy, but she reminds me where we met. So I decided I needed to go to Portland, but by the time I heard about it, it was sold out. It was absolutely sold out. And my husband was sitting back there, said, so go anyway. I'm like, it's sold out. And we were about 2 hours away from Portland. And he said, so you go, and if somebody doesn't show up, maybe they'll give you a spot. He said, if they're still sold out, you go to Kittery and spend the day shopping. We had those two little boys who were jumping over furniture, and so he offered to stay home with those two little boys jumping over furniture while I potentially went shopping at Kittery. I am still married to that man because I'm no fool. But I went. I had a conversation with an editor in the break room who was very nice, and I asked her, can I send a story to you? Well, actually, I think somebody else asked her because I was too chicken, and she said yes. So I sent it to her. She turned the story down. But she sent a letter, and she sent a very nice, thoughtful, encouraging letter. And this was the first editor I ever spoke to. I thought, okay, this is doable. I can actually talk to editors. This is fantastic. And I worked on the story for a couple of years, sent it out, got the same kind of feedback back. So I put it in a drawer, like figuratively and literally, for I'd say a good 10 years, maybe 15 years. So by the time the story came out, it was 20 years after I wrote it. And the editor that I sent it to, because I took it out, spent another year like rewriting it, sent it back out. The editor that initially rejected it was, and as she said I could tell the story, is Mary Lee Donovan from Candlewick. The person that I sent this to eventually was Andrea Tampa from Candlewick, and Mary Lee is her boss, and they bought it. The difference between then and now was all the work that went in between, and the putting it aside. So I think that's key. What else was I supposed to mention? Really open this up and
You're
look at
good,
questions?
Jamie, you're good. We'll come back.
Okay.
So for Sumo Joe, the idea just sort of popped in my head as a rhyme, and I was at a Brazilian restaurant, like a dive, standing in line behind a big guy, and like you have to weigh your food and then you pay for it and then you sit down. So I was waiting for my husband to finish getting his food and pay for us, and I just like typed them into my phone, just like these random rhymes, and then I ended up taking a children's book class, just like literally at like my high school, like extension school, and I thought, oh, they're going to want us to write a book, so I better do it in advance, just so I won't be all stressed because it's only a 4-week class. And then it sort of sat, and then my middle daughter, who was 7, like in high school at the time, read it. She goes, no, I think it's good, Mom. It should be a book. Like, no, you should make it into a book. And so like I didn't. Like I was scared to even submit it to that Lee and Low, but then finally, just right before we went on vacation, I was like, I'm just going to send it in because I don't need to write a query letter because I don't know how to do that. So I'm just going to send it in. And so, but then after that, I joined Writer's Loft. So at the time, it was in Sherborne, and it's moved, I guess, slightly further away from me. But now they do it virtually, and I really like that group because it's basically like every month they just say like who wants to submit a book, and so if you don't have anything, you don't sign up, and if you do, you get put in a group. It's always different people, And so it's usually 4 people, 4 manuscripts, and you sort of read each other's and give feedback. And I find it to be really useful, like always for my, like when I think I'm done, or even if I'm like, I know it's a draft, because just, it doesn't matter if they're published or not. They just like, you get 3 really good opinions, and usually that helps me shape it. Like I just need it once, sometimes twice, but usually just once with, a random group, like, of people who are passionate about children's books. And I kind of like how it is always different people, although a lot of times, you see the same people, but it really works for me. And now that it's remote, it's even, even more accessible, because before it was sort of like a 35-minute, drive, and now it's maybe like a 45-minute drive, but remote, it's like, it's perfect. And
Has everyone heard of the Writer's Loft?
it's like Josh Funk, who you might know for Rhyming Picture Books, like he's on the board, and he told me about it, invited me to join. And it's basically like you don't have to join the organization. You can just sign up for the picture book, and it's literally like $5. Like not even a donate, like sort of you pay $5 to do that, hour and a half group.
Or they have editors that come from like Charlesbridge or Candlewick, and you can take a workshop even if you're not a full-time member.
Right.
So those are all good.
Some are free events and some are paid. Like anything with an agent or editor is usually a paid event, but it can be like $35. And there's a lot of great free events, and it's just a really nice community, like our local community. So
I have no idea where it's located now, though, do we?
Hudson.
Hudson.
I mean, I've been once.
I haven't been there.
So we
yet.
all do the online.
I've been online.
Yeah.
And it's the things you learn. I mean, there's some great tips that you hear along the way, but it's also the people you meet.
Yes.
And I think almost every author that I've talked to, I love hearing like how did they, like who are the people who made the difference. It's like, and they met in some very casual, funny ways, and it changed their lives. So it's the stuff you learn, but the people you meet, and that's why groups like this are really terrific.
True. Do you agree with this?
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, the Kidlit community is so amazing, and I think the different kinds of groups you can be part of. And I join a lot of different groups. So I am a virtual member of the Writers Loft, and then 12 by 12 is another organization for picture book writers. And it's framed as a challenge that you write 12 picture books in 12 months, so 1 a month. Many people write more. The idea being, particularly when you're getting ready to query, that you want to have at least 5 manuscripts. People say at least 3. I think at least 5 manuscripts in case an agent asks for more work, which usually they will. And so I met some of my critique partners through 12 by 12. I met some at SCBWI conferences. And then Inked Voices is another group I'm part of that is a bit like the Writers Loft. They have some editors and agents who do workshops, and you can also have critique groups or pop-up critique groups if you need extra eyes on a manuscript. At one point I was also it was through a contest. I got a free year of membership to Rate Your Story, which I used that if I needed extra eyes. They give you a ranking on it. And, so I did that just when I had the free year. And then there's one other thing I'm part of, and I can't remember what it is, but I have different critique groups for middle grade and picture books. And one of the things that I think shifted for me is initially I was part of a group that was a wonderful group of people, but everybody wrote such different stuff, from picture books to personal essay collections, and it was really great, and I got a lot out of it in kind of learning, but I also started to find that the feedback I was getting wasn't as useful because some people, they didn't really know much about picture books at all. It was more helpful for my novel. So now I have groups where I feel I really trust the feedback and their knowledge of the industry. The other group I'm part of is a poetry. I also write children's poetry. And so I'm part of an online poetry critique group as well.
Oh, there's also Kidlit 411,
Yes.
which is an online blog, but they have a Facebook group, and you can do like a manuscript critique exchange.
Very cool. And if I can also give a shout out to Nancy, does what she calls the May Days, where we're all online and encouraging each other for the month of May to write something. We commit we commit to writing every day. And it's not just the encouragement of being part of it for the month, but it's also the people you meet online. There are people that I've never met in person, but Mia.
Yeah.
When Mia walked in the door, it's like, Mia! This is the first time that we've ever met, but we instantly knew each other just from what you can develop online. So it's in-person events, but it's also online, like Nancy's May Days.
Yeah, look for my May Days on Facebook. Happy to include anyone. I was just thinking, I started out with poetry too, and that's how I worked my way into the picture book world, which isn't a bad way because you start with very small, succinct words. And I was thinking one time I was at a Robert Frost's conference, which is an excellent thing to do if you love poetry. It's up in Franconia, New Hampshire. And Galway Cannell was up there editing his published book before he got up to read from it. He was still, so I feel like it's always draft in some ways. Like you're still always working through your story even when you have it all done sometimes. So yeah, I certainly belong to about 4 different groups too. One's poetry, one's over here. I got some friends there, and Janet and I are in a group too. So
And we've got a couple of people from a group here.
yes, I have magic story makers. I find all the groups like so helpful, but like Peter said, you do have to make progress. Like you can't weigh everything, you know.
Right.
You have to have that inner voice too, saying like, okay, it's time to submit, and why not? And that leads to an agent, because we're going to talk about agents, because sometimes you can have an agent who's also a fabulous critiquer of your work and helps with that too. So do you guys want to discuss agents a little? Do you want one? Do you have one?
I signed with my agent last August, and she's great. She's very active. I send
tell
her.
us who.
Oh yes. So I'm with Trisha Lawrence at Aaron Murphy Literary, and the pathway of getting there, I guess. So this is one of the reasons I think just putting yourself out there and doing conferences and doing critiques when you have the chance is helpful. In that, Aaron Murphy Literary is usually closed to unsolicited to submissions unless it's by referral or you meet someone at a conference. And so a different agent there, I had done a critique with before, and she liked my work, and I had an opportunity to submit to her through a workshop that I didn't even know we were going to have a submission opportunity. And then she said at the end, "Oh, you can send your manuscripts." And I went, "Oh, how great!" So I sent her my novel, and she ended up liking it and asking if she could, but she didn't have time, space in her schedule. She said, "I have a colleague who I think would like it," and that's how I got the offer from Trisha. And I ended up being, I never expect people when you do a critique or a conference, I never expect a referral, but I had a couple of really nice authors who did critiques who ended up referring me to agents too. So I was able to submit to some other people that way. Again, never ever expecting it or never asking for it, but it's just the way that people can be so helpful.
Did the Discovery Award help you at all?
I think it did. I mean, at that point, so it was interesting. I got the award, and I think I emailed you because the deliberations were happening, and I got this offer, and I said, "Oh no, I might have to pull out of the award." But it was, I think the timing was that at the time I hadn't, when I submitted for the award, I hadn't signed with Trisha. But it was very, very exciting. Yes.
Yeah. I just feel like all the things, like I always tell people, just write everything and anything, because you never know. Like one of my poems won a prize that led to a trip to New York City where I met with a Scholastic editor. I mean, I just feel like anything some people narrow it down, like, and sometimes that's good, maybe you should concentrate on middle grade, but other times, like, write a poem, submit it, and who knows where that'll take you. So that's just, sorry I jumped.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
So just because I've been, blogging on children's books, I just meet a lot of, authors and illustrators and publishers. And so I knew some authors who had agents that just wasn't a good experience. Like nothing happened. The agent didn't do the work. And so from my perspective, I was like, why would I put my career into the hands of someone I've never met before? I just found it so odd. I find the whole structure so odd. they don't get paid until they sell. And it's just a the whole thing makes, because my background is I'm an entrepreneur, and we're a creative staffing company, and so like, we get paid when we do work. That just makes sense to me. So what happened was Sumo Joe got published, and then the illustrator has an agent, Jennifer Soloway March with Andrea Brown, and so like she DM'd me on Twitter, like, hey, do you want to talk? And I was like, thank God I normally don't even check my DMs, so thank God I checked. So I called her, and she was like, okay, I like your Sumo Joe, and like, what else do you have? So I sent some stuff in, and to your point, they weren't, I didn't have that much stuff, and it wasn't that ready to go, and so she took a really long time to respond, like it was like 4, 5, 6 months. Yeah. And she was like, oh, I just couldn't decide on you. She called back, or emailed back, and she was kind of like, you're kind of not ready yet, but like, keep submitting to me. Like, when I get one from you that, like, really sings, like, it was sort of like maybe I'll sign you. And I was kind of like, okay, so I was sort of submitting like here and there, and then I picked like 5 agents where I kind of knew them because they had published books, and like I blogged about their books, or I knew them on social media. So it was just 5, and I got like one I never heard from, and then one said, oh, thanks, but I'm not like that. I'm only looking for graphic novels from a BIPOC. But like, she was super cool. And then one of them was like submit, and then maybe one of them was just like a rejection. And so I submitted, and then like, I really wanted this guy so badly. He was like so awesome. And then he was like, it just doesn't speak to me. And I was like, oh, I'm so crushed. I'm just crushed. And I was just like, I can't even like write for like months, because I'm just like crushed. Like, I have to have that guy. And I got turned down. But when I was talking to Jennifer March Soloway, I was kind of like, yeah, I'm looking for an agent, but like, I'm just kind of waiting for someone to float by. And she was like, yeah, good luck with that. And I was like thinking, well, actually, because I do a lot of social media work, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, to cut it short, I have a non-traditional agent in that the book I did for Scholastic was with the book packager. And then the book packaging business was super dead during COVID lockdown. So then he's just started submitting books to publishers, because like, that's his client base. And then once he sold his first picture book, he called me. He was like, I think I'm gonna do the agent thing now, because book packaging is dead. Do you have anything? And I was like, I do have stuff. And I had already worked with him and his whole company, and I was like, what the heck? I already know you, because that was my one thing I wanted to know, like, who am I working with? And so anyway, he's been fantastic. We've had 4 editor meetings. I sold 1 book. I have another one where I'm auditioning with my second round of edits. I had a meeting today with a different publisher, and I have another one with a contract that we're trying to figure out. And so, like, they do float by.
Before I forget, because clearly I have a history of forgetting.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
A couple of resources that are really helpful. Query Tracker is one, if you're not familiar with that, to find out what agents are looking for.
Could you say that again?
Query Tracker. Yeah, Query, Query Tracker. And Manuscript Wishlist is another. It's a website, but you can also do hashtag MSWL wish list. just the acronym. Manuscript wish list. Whatever that acronym is, you can do that on Twitter, and they'll just write what it is that they're looking for. So those are 2 helpful resources if you are looking for an agent.
What about Submittable? Can you do that?
I don't know if I've ever used Submittable. No. I've heard of it, but I
Poetry
haven't
calls.
used it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Go ahead, Janet.
Yeah,
I'm sorry I interrupted
no,
the
before
flow.
In terms of an agent, I have an agent. I love my agent. I would jump in front of a bus for my agent. Well, maybe not, but I would at least push her out of the way. Definitely do that. Her name is Saba Sullivan, And I guess we've been together for about a year now, maybe a little bit less. I first got an agent back, I don't know, it was like 2010, I guess. And I had queried very few agents because I wasn't sure if I was ready. I wasn't sure that I could commit the time. At the time, I told you about my boys, and then I was taking care of my elderly parents for 10 years, and it was a lot. But I decided to try it, and I just queried a couple of agents, and I actually got one, which is unusual. Most people are going to query many, many agents. But I would say that I lucked out, except that I wasn't really paying attention to, is this a good fit? And I won't say she was a bad agent, because I don't think she was. She was not the right fit for me. And she really only wanted to represent middle grade. I had mostly picture books. That should have been that flag. I had mostly picture book manuscripts, but she was much more focused on middle grade, and I had written a middle grade that she kept trying to submit. Got wonderful, wonderful rejections, absolutely, and I mean that seriously. Some of the most encouraging, fantastic rejections, but they were all rejections. And so I rewrote it, and then she sent it out again, but we still weren't making any traction. I said, hey, how about a couple of picture books? And she was really lukewarm on the whole picture book thing. So I eventually realized that this isn't going to work. And then I got from Christian Trimmer this should be a chapter book series. You should get these characters, pop them in, but she didn't want to do that either. She said, no, let's keep trying it as a middle grade. And eventually I realized this isn't working. Also because I couldn't really have a conversation with her. She was way full of energy, which meant you couldn't get a word in edgewise. And I wasn't always hearing back. When I tried to get in touch with her, it would take a while. And I realized this is not working. This is not the match. And we parted ways. I said, it's not you, it's me. And we broke up. We're still like on Facebook and liking each other's posts. There's no animosity. If I see her, she gets a hug. But it wasn't working. But at that point, I was gun shy. I was very gun shy, and I went, I think, 5 years maybe without an agent. I queried only one person at that time, and that was because, as you said, it's good to know someone. And I was at a dinner with one of my critique groups. I have 2 critique groups. Nancy's one, and we've got Anna and Caroline over here in our critique group. And this is my other critique group, and we were at dinner at SCBWI, and one of the writers brought her agent along. And we had a great time, like laughing till tears come out of your eyes, falling under the table because you were laughing so hard. And I thought, oh, I like her. So I queried her. She said no. Okay, but I still like her. And I didn't, and that was it for a couple of years. I decided, okay, I knew that I could work with this woman because I had the chance to meet her. And I'm not going to query anybody else until I at least hear them at a conference or meet them, have the chance to talk something. And so during COVID, everything went virtual. The upside of that was that, you got to see much more. And I had just sold a book, this one, to Candlewick. And that was because 10 years earlier, going to a conference, and Andrea was there, Andrea Tompa. And she said no to what I sent her at that point. But then oh, look at you, you're good. You are an entrepreneur. She said no to that book, but she said, always feel free to send me anything else. And I didn't have anything that was quite my Andrea standard. So it took 10 years. In fact, it was one of our critique group members, Margot Lemieux, who said she heard this in a critique group and went, it's beautiful. And not a cheerleader, just very matter of fact, and that gave me the encouragement, the confidence to send it to Andrea, and she said yes. So I had sold that. I got a literary lawyer, which is a thing, and there's a couple of them out there that are really good. So I got a literary lawyer to look at the contract. She's not my agent, but still, it was good to have her eyes on it. And then I sold a chapter book, also to Candlewick and Andrea, and then I wanted to do another one, send it to them on a wing and a prayer, And they said yes. And I thought, I am so over my head. I am not a contract person. I'm way over my head, and decided I really do need an agent. And during COVID, I was really able to go to a lot of virtual events, hear from a number of agents. I did not query a lot of them. I have to know that this is someone that I can work with, have a conversation with, and that's when I found Saba. Having sold something, I think, helped, because she was actually closed. But because I was at this conference, I could send something to her. But before I said yes, I was like, I really need to have a couple of conversations. So we had a couple of Zoom conversations. One lasted an hour, the other one lasted 2 hours. And I thought, if she's willing to invest that kind of time in me, then this is someone that I absolutely could see myself working with, without a doubt. And this time I knew the questions to ask, partly because of experience, but also Lisa Stringfellow, and I don't know if she has it on her website or not. She said she was going to put it up. Has a list of questions. It's called the Ask. It might be on her website. Lisa Stringfellow. Fantastic questions. I got that, had it right in front of me during our conversations, so I could ask a lot of these questions, and it made it very clear to me afterwards that yes, this is someone I could work with. She has nothing to do, she doesn't get royalties or anything from Time for Bed, Old House. She gets no agent fee. My first chapter book that's coming out in the fall, she gets nothing from that one. The next two that are coming out after that, she sold, so she gets something from that. I can't tell you how supportive she has been so far for this one and the one that's coming out in the fall, even though she's not connected to it. So when you find the match, it is awesome. But do the research. Find blogs, find video interviews, podcasts. Podcasts are huge in terms of learning not only about the craft of writing, but also the business, such as finding an agent. Manuscript Academy always has podcasts with writers and illustrators and agents, editors. So that's a great way to find out about agents. Who else? There's a million podcasts. Jennifer Loughran, Literati Cast, is another one. I don't think she's done one in the last few months, but that's another one where you can hear all these people and you really get a sense of what they're like and what their personality is like, and that's what you need from an agent. You need a match. You need someone who is going to really focus on your goals. I compare it kind of, I work with college students, so kids going to college, I say you do your research. You think about what you want, you find out what the colleges offer, you make up a very practical list, but then you go and you visit, but then you go with your gut. You know the pros and cons, you know the practical side, but in the end you have to focus on your gut. What feels right to you. So I'm so happy with Saba.
Nice. It's really nice when you can meet them.
Yes.
Which I guess, Peter, you've met your agent in person?
I have met my agent in person, yeah. Similar story that I had when I first started out, whereas I self-published, so I didn't have an agent. I thought my book was great, and I just put it out there in the world. But then I realized, if I wanted to go big time with a real publisher, I needed somebody. So my twin brother Paul, he started doing research, I think the Yellow Pages, just looking for literary agents. And we found somebody who was, she had sort of semi-retired, had spent 30 years in the industry, worked for Hope Mifflin, and handled some really big books. And I was amazed that she would take the time to meet with me. She lived in Concord, Mass. And she signed me on. So we had this meeting, she signed me on, and I was like, this is so exciting. And she and I didn't click. It just didn't click. It didn't seem like she understood what I was, I described the North Star and the mission, and that didn't, just nothing, no.
Wow.
And she was just like, do you have anything else? She's looking through, and and then I gave her a couple of books, and my twin brother did much more. He was a better agent, and he was down there in New York City and meeting with people, and I thought, wow, this isn't working out. And I have a animation media company called Fablevision in Boston, and we had the very good luck when we first started out, this is 25 years ago, our first client, one of our first clients was Scholastic, and they asked us if we would create a website for Clifford the Big Red Dog. And the producer on the Scholastic side was Jeff Kaminsky, who turns out when he wasn't working for Scholastic was creating picture books. And he had an agent named Holly McGee at Pippin Properties. And he said, he called me up one day and he said, Peter, I think it's time for you to meet Holly. So I said, that sounds cool. So I went to New York and I had lunch with Holly McGee. And I mean, as it turns out, she had just launched Pippin like 2 years prior. I didn't know that. I thought it had been a long time. But I remember thinking to myself, I don't know if this is going to be a fit because she seems she's kind of that New York kind of tough, you know. And then like halfway through, I'm like, I need that, you know. I need someone to help me power through this because it's a lot of weeds out there and swamps and trying to get through the. But we also clicked. We clicked, and she understood what I was doing, and so I signed on with Holly, and it's been 20 years now, and she's been an incredible guide. I don't need to hire a lawyer. I just skipped that part with her because her contracts are so good, and they're so. She's looking out for me, and I can feel it in the contracts. I don't have to worry about it. But more importantly, she really understands who I am, and she kind of knows, like, and she let me. She's like Yoda. She kind of let me go. You know, if you want to do the book, you can, because you get so excited at the beginning, like, oh, you know, someone wants me to illustrate a book, and I would read it, and I'm like, yeah, that would make kids laugh, and I'm not going to point out the books that I worked on that weren't so, you know, weren't like, you know, they didn't blaze a trail on the charts. But I said yes to things that I probably shouldn't have because I was just excited. Oh, I got a gig. But she let me do that. Like, she could have said, Pete, this isn't really, but she let me make my mistakes to find out what is my voice. Because you can get distracted, you know, with people say, oh, here's a contract, and you know, it's so exciting. But after maybe 15 years with her, it finally clicked, and I'm like, I know very clearly now, like, what is one of my books, and if I collaborate with people, it's super clear to me. Like, wow, I was meant to collaborate with this person. And I'm going to do a shout out for Southampton Writers Conference, which is in the Hamptons. If you want a nice cushy 1 week vacation in the summer, it's at Stonehill. I think it's Stonehill College. Emma Walton Hamilton, Stony Brook. Sorry, that's right, Stony Brook. Emma Walton Hamilton, who is a picture book creator. You may know her mom, Julie Andrews. And when she asked me to teach there a couple of summers ago, 8 summers ago, and there was this. We were presenting, and then she said, "Oh, my mom's here," and she was sitting in the back with a baseball cap on, and she came up, and I didn't know that it was Julie Andrews, and she came up, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, she looks just like Julie Andrews." And then she started speaking. I'm like, "Oh my God, and then suddenly I'm like, somewhere in the recess of my, oh my God, that is Julie Andrews. And so I told her, I'm like, "Oh, my mom grew up in London too in the war," and we started chit-chatting, and then she gave me a kiss. And when she said goodbye, so. But that was it was an amazing conference, just connected because it was there are lots of genres, so you can learn how to write a play, a musical, there are adult books and picture books. And one of my students showed me her folder with some poems, and the very first poem I read, I'm like, oh my God, this is a picture book. This is a book. And it was called The Museum by Susan Verde. So all those books you see on this end, a big chunk of those are Susan Verde books. And I told her, I said, this is a book, and if anyone else illustrates it, I will be jealous. And I introduced her to Holly, and Holly signed her on, and the museum came out of that, and the I Am series, and there's something missing. Oh, You and Me. So they're agents, but they're also these sort of informal talent scouts out there. and there are going to be people that will bump into you, and might be at a conference, it could be at a dinner party, and or it might be someone's just saying, just seeing your work and loving it and saying, I got to introduce you to somebody. But those little connecting the dots are so important and can change your life. And we're going to save this for the next get together, but I have a pretty cool story of someone who has landed a pretty cool slew of book contracts from just a random one meeting of a very proud aunt. And that's all I'll say.
So we all need twin brothers and aunts.
You too.
Well, maybe just one more question, then we'll take something from the audience. Just maybe quickly, a story about a reader that was just so inspired by one of your books that just totally blew you away. I'll start with Peter.
Oh my gosh, 25 years worth of hearing back from people. I mean, that to me is fuel. When you hear that what you wrote, what you committed to paper, reached out to the right person at the right time. And I've had some really pretty moving stories of, like there's even somebody in the audience tonight who told me tonight that the North Star book saved her son's life. And that book in particular has done a lot of healing work. And that to me, I've had high school kids who have written to me saying that they had been contemplating suicide. And when they read the story, it spoke to them to say, your path is a beautiful path, and it's going to be unlike anybody else's path, and it's also going to get kind of swampy, and that's okay. And I also love teachers, like what teachers have done with my work. The Dot, a teacher in Iowa who started a little something called Dot Day, which has turned into International Dot Day. Started with his classroom and then a couple of 100 classrooms, and last year we had 196 countries participate, 20 million kids and teachers celebrating creativity on September 15th. Happens every year, international.day.org. And that came out of a teacher reacting to the book, not me saying, hey, how do we sell more books? This was a teacher just saying, we love this. And Terry Shea, who's the teacher in Iowa, I just love, he's such a humble guy and humble teacher. But he really started this amazing revolution also about creativity, that is important in schools. And that's my other soapbox, is that part of that revolution of changing schools, we have to allow creativity to flourish in schools, not only for our kids, but our teachers. And we, in public education, we're telling teachers what to teach, and also now what they can't teach, which is another subject for a panel.
I don't think we can top that.
No.
Let's go to Q&A.
Right, that's true. I was going to tell one myself, though. My first book was about a little girl with Down syndrome, my sister Alicia May. And years later, I was signing at an event, and these two sisters came up, and they're like, we know your whole story by heart, and they had performed it as a play, and they won an award, and it was just so amazing that they, to hear your lines said back to you, you're like, whoa, I don't even know my line. But that's just like what you want. That's even if there's just one of those stories with one of your words, that's the hope, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know if anyone else has one, but
I don't think it's not one story, but my first book, Seaside Dream, features a grandmother and a granddaughter. They are of Cape Verdean descent, as am I, and it's a story that speaks a lot to immigration. But when people read it, especially adults, they would come back to me and say, that reminded me of my grandma, that reminded me of my mère, my nana, my vovó, whatever it is they would call their grandmother, and all these different nationalities were reflected in their grandmother's names. And I thought, this is so cool. This is a Cape Verdean family, and so many people connected it to their own story. So I love that it just went beyond any border. So I just think that's very cool.
So I met a mom on Twitter, and she was like, my 3-year-old son, his favorite book is Sumo Joe. And I was like, that's so great, I have like one fan. Like, and I was like, what's your address? I have stickers, and I have this so special. I'm gonna send him swag. So she gives me the address, and I send her the package, and then she tells her son, hey, the author of Sumo Joe, your favorite book, sent you something. What do you think it is? And he was like, it's another, like sequel. He was like, it's another book of it. And I was like, no, like that's like, it's only been a few months. And it's like, no, sorry, it's just stickers. But I was like, but I'll write another one for you. My #1 fan.
Sumo Joe too.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. Well, anyone have a question out there? Otherwise, we can sell books, wrap up. Oh yeah, please.
I was curious, Maria, when I heard you speak about your 7th graders' input. I have a daughter who's in 6th grade. I blog at Harlem Lovebirds, and I think we've met before in the blogging sphere. But I live in Hyde Park, and I was kind of curious because my kids are 7 and 11, and what impact to the children in your lives, what impact do they bring to your writing? And as far as staying relevant and being connected to, I don't know if you do like your own little mini focus group in your household, or how are you each kind of tapping into what the pulse of childhood is like now?
Okay, so my daughter, my middle daughter, who was in high school, like she did sports her whole life, every kind of sport. Like I wrote a book, How to Coach Girls, based on what my girls' coaching experience was like. But anyway, in high school, she was like, there are no cool Asian female athletes. I was like, what? I was like, Chloe Kim, you love Chloe Kim. She goes, okay, there's one. And I was like, no, girl. There's a lot. You just don't, you haven't met any. So I wrote this book, I sent it to Scholastic, and they said, no, thank you. But I was like, I'm going to publish it because, you know what I mean? Like, first of all, everyone thinks Asian female athletes are like, they're like the dainty, like ice skaters or like the gymnasts. And I was like, no, they're badass, like, and I would say, my kids give me the like very direct feedback. It's not, they don't try to cushion it, and so I find that very helpful.
I'll add to that too, because I have a 2nd grader and a 5th grader, and I make them. I mean, my critique groups, we read things aloud in our virtual meetings, but I make my kids read every picture book aloud too, especially because my younger one, when things in rhyme, she's very, if it's slightly off, she will read it exactly how she hears it. So they get kind of sick of it, but I think they secretly like it. And a lot of my ideas also just spark from conversations with them and being on walks together and things that they find really cool and interesting. So they're, I definitely, when it comes to the honesty of advice, they don't mess around, right? I mean, my daughter the other day was like, that's kind of like, too sweet, or something that they don't pretend.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one time my daughter's friend, like I had just met this girl, we were carpooling together. She's like, oh, you came to my school. I remember you. She was so excited. And my daughter, Elizabeth, was like, she's only written one book. And I'm like, oh my gosh, your kids are like the most brutal. Like, that was rough. But yeah, hopefully it gets better. They're good. You're good for some things. Another question? Yes.
Mia, I have a question about, you had mentioned that there's a lack of diversity in children's lit. I sent my book to a few different agents, and one woman in particular, one agent, loved the book, and the main character is an Italian-American bus driver. And she loved the book. She sent it out to 3 other agents, and the feedback she got was, it's a little too risky right now. The fact that, she, even though, I didn't have him short, stereotypical like that, but she felt it was just way too, they didn't want to take the risk because they were like a little afraid. And I'm just curious, because of the political climate now, and I'm just curious if you're finding that? Because it honestly, she wrote wonderful things, and I cried for about 3 days because she still rejected it. And I've been sitting on it now for like 3 months, but in my heart I know it's a good book. So I'm just wondering if, you let that stop you, or...
Well, if you think about it, the publishing world is predominantly white females. The librarian world is predominantly white females. The teachers are predominantly white females. And so, you've had that sort of structural racism baked in from the beginning of time. And in more recent years, you've seen diverse books getting ALA awards, winning Caldecott's, winning Newbery. And that's a real seismic change, but it doesn't trickle all the way down. There's still like that barrier, especially for new authors that, they can't say like, oh, it's going to sell a lot of books. But that's why we need your books. That's why you have to keep pushing, because, we sort of have to change that world together. And so we do that by just as parents or as readers to support diverse authors. If we don't buy their books, we request them at the library. We write reviews on Amazon and Goodreads. We retweet their stuff. So the more we can show that, because they think like only Italians will buy your book. How big is the Italian market? It's literally like how they think. But it's like, no, that's a universal story. And if there's humor, like we all love that. And like, who doesn't love, Italian food or we all can relate to that. We all know Italian neighbors or friends, or, you know what I mean? And so, but they have a very sort of groupthink, narrow, and until someone proves that it can sell big time, we don't think it can. And you can't blame them, because like their job's on the line. They have 5 duds in a row, they have no job, right? So it's not like they're just being racist or, you know what I mean, like, oh, I'm going to put up a barrier. It's, it's a business. People have to make money. Like a book, even like a small publisher, it's like $30,000 to get a picture book out into the world. And that's like with all the overhead not counting. Like, you already have editors, so we're not going to count that. You already have marketing people. You know what I mean? It's like a 30,000 plus investment. So how many books has to sell at full price to break even? Well, that's what they're calculating, right? And that's the reality. So for you, keep trying, but also you can do yourself a favor. You can build your own author platform. So you can be on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. TikTok is great. Like, my kids are like, don't go on TikTok. But, you're already on enough social media. But it's like, TikTok is probably the fastest platform to build a huge audience right now. You can't do that on Pinterest. It will take a long time on Instagram. You know what I mean? But like, so you build your author website, or you're pre-published, but at least you can get on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. You can make, YouTube videos. I mean, you find what you care about in the children's book world, and it may be a journey. It may be a journey of like, maybe first I'm just going to blog about Italian, picture books, and realize there aren't any. Because I literally did, I live in Newton, and we have Nonantum, which is a real Italian, and I did, there's Italian month, I think it's October, and I made a list, and it was like, it's a really short list, and most of these books are out of print. Like, what the heck? What the heck? They need more. They need more. but it's like, you can do work, like you're empowered. And when you're empowered, you help others, and then that will come back at you in spades.
Thank you.
And can I add, this is just a few people who told you that, and sometimes people are wrong. I gave my first agent a picture book that was all about different types of hair. It was a very upbeat, rhyming picture book about different types of hair. And the feedback I got from her and her partner was, oh no, there's just too many books about hair right now. There's too many. Like, I don't see the too many, but they were insistent, and they said there's just no more market for it. The market is saturated. Can I tell you, in the last few years since, the books that have come out about hair and award-winning books, sometimes people are wrong. You know, if you hear that from everybody across the board, well then maybe they hit on something. But if you hear that from just a few people, you need to check it against some other folks.
Thank you. Knight, you had a question?
I did, yeah. First off, by the way, someone who lived in Dorchester for 8 years, and you say Dante,
Oh.
I probably visual.
I know. I learned about the other dot too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Parade and lawn chairs and drinking
Yeah.
at 11 a.m. This is more of an analytical question. I was thinking, and probably my marketing background. So I've taken my children's books, so I have 2 children, a lot of picture books. And I decided to just build out like a spreadsheet grid. I started doing word count, page count. Is there something similar that, like, am I going completely in the wrong direction if I'm looking at word count? Do you monitor word count in your books? And then page count divisible by 4 you mentioned because
Yeah.
But
I mean, there are sort of that standard, 32, 40, 42. But for me, it's the generally, like a good picture book, I've just found, in my experience, 5 to 6 minutes is just, and by reading it with real kids, you'll find out if it's too long. You'll just know it. You'll be like, wow, they're starting to fidget, or they're like leaning on their edge of their chair. And they're the best, really, the best critique group are the people who you hope will read your book. But there's those suggestions that they give you are kind of, it just sort of, it actually, it's human nature, like how long a good story will be.
okay.
So
Let's know more about that.
but in the word count thing, it drives me a little crazy because, but I personally, this is where I lean. I just, like, if you can say it with less, do it. Because a lot of times you forget, like, oh, if this is going to be a picture book, you're going to have an author, an artist teamed up with you, and those pictures do a lot of heavy lifting. But you can use those as stage directions. In fact, I often think of my stories, the way they start in my head, is a movie. So I'm a movie director. I just have to sketch note my movie. And I'm picturing the little movie, and the camera's moving this way and that way, a character comes in this way. So I'm just sketch noting.
Well, and for us who don't illustrate, I have found that that's so helpful to me to see like where the page turns, to imagine that. And also I have, those little photo books that are like, they're exactly the size of a picture book. So they're 32 pages, 16 spreads. So I just put my words in there to see like,
This is what I actually use
that
these.
kind of
I bought
blank
these
book
many
or-
years ago. They're from Barefoot Books, but we sell them here. And I tell kids this is my all-time favorite book. And they're like, what? This is how it starts, and there's this awesome double-page spread, and this is how it ends. And the kids are like, "What? There's nothing in there." And I just kind of keep going with it. And I'm like, real happy about my book. And they're like, and then they sort of get it. Then penny drops, and they're like, "Oh yeah, right. You can put your ideas, your words, your pictures. It could be my own book." And I was like, "Yeah." And I actually do use these. I will comp up a rough version of the book. And it is good to know, like, when, like, should it be, here or on the next page? And then you also, if you're writing it, and I just handwrite, forget the typography and the computers and stuff, just handwrite it. And if it's filling too much of the page, you realize that that's just too many words. Visually you'd be like, yeah, that doesn't look like a picture book. I'm going way too long here. So, and then the cool thing is, then you have this physical artifact that you can give to a teacher. That's one of my other secret weapons, is give it to a teacher and just say, go, and just see, and then see what they say. What do the kids say? What does the teacher say? And that feedback is awesome.
I just make like a dummy. I just use copy paper and like a staple it, and then I print out my manuscript and cut it up and just glue it with stick glue. But it also helps me see, like, is there enough to illustrate? Like, is it all the same? Like, is there enough scene change? Because I'm not an illustrator, but I want to make sure it's not like we're always in the living room. You know what I mean? We can't be in the living room for like 4 spreads,
Or can you? But it's kind of fun though to like, even the idea, like, I get excited being the gentle rebel, right? like if you hear, like if somebody says, if they make a critique of your book, and like sometimes I'll say, oh, that's a good idea, but then sometimes I get kind of feisty and I think, you know what? They just haven't seen this version. Like, I could do this. Like my Dinner with Andre. Do you remember that film? Two people sitting at a table. And they ran the camera for an hour, and they recorded, and they released it as a film.
Yeah.
And people were like, "What? You know,
I know.
there was no other scene."
was a
So,
what.
you know, yeah.
Did you have a comment?
There's, oh,
Yeah.
I just want to say there's a site called Accelerated Reader where they have the word counts of different books. You can look it up. So if you have a book in mind and you're wondering, well, how long is that one? It's a good place to check.
That was exactly what
That was what you said.
Accelerated Reader.
Yeah, arfinder.com.
AR Finder. There we go.
Yeah. It was this, because sometimes what's nice too is if there's a book that I feel like I'm writing a picture book that's in a similar feel, it's a lyrical picture book, and the pacing just feels really similar. Sometimes I'll look at what the word count is of a published book that I really like, and I will compare where my word count is with that. Not to get, I think it's really the pacing that you don't get too fixated on the word count, but sometimes that just helps me figure out if I'm really off.
Maybe one more question and then we'll wrap up.
I probably don't have time for this. It's sort of related. I actually am interested in voicing for books, and obviously, as we're trying to keep up with children's books, more and more famous people, or Peter, you be a good example, but are partnering with doing that. And I was wondering, does that, in addition to the writing, do you have that voice in your head, or does that fall under the publishing aspect, or how does someone decide or say, and again, we may not have time for this, hey, this is what I imagine this book sounding like, because I write and I know what I think things sound like. And does that fall into that whole genre, or is that like a whole nother world where you're going to go now into, like you were saying, being an entrepreneur, is it a voiceover, or who gets to decide the direction of those decisions in your book?
I can answer. I was at the US BBY conference last month, and so the person who's like does the most audiobooks was one of the speakers, and she was like, audiobooks are through the roof. Like it's at 40%. Or she was like, we can't find enough voice talent. And I was like, oh, my roommate's son is an actor and like just young in Hollywood. Like maybe he wouldn't want to be a voice. And I was like, how does that work? So she was like, okay. First of all, you just have to make a professional recording. So you go into a recording studio, make a professional recording. I would probably like a reel.
But I guess I was asking, do you get the choice as the author, or is it your agent that it becomes an agent thing? Like if you like.
It's a real mix.
Yeah.
It's a real mix. There are sometimes, there are companies that do audio, and they just they know like that book needs, a gravelly British, voice. I had, on a similar note, a lot of my books have been turned into animated films.
Yeah.
And of course, they need voices. So The North Star was being animated by Scholastic Western Woods. So they said, they asked me, they said, who do you imagine? I'm like, Tim Curry. Like, why not shoot for the stars? So they're like, okay, we'll give him a call. And the next day he said yes. And so the next week I was on the phone in the green room with Tim Curry, and they're like, oh, we've got some technical difficulties, you're gonna have to tap dance. And so I was hanging out with Tim Curry in the green room, and it was kind of fun because I got to tell him about the story and all the different characters, and he was coming up on the fly with these awesome different voices for the different characters. So
Cool.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily, like you were saying, like if you were to say, oh, I'm going to do my moon book, and how you have it, you're not locked into necessarily going through your lawyer or your agent. You have some say in that process, is what you're saying? As the author of the book.
Yes.
The author
No,
of the
you
book.
can. You can weigh in. You can weigh in, and they can ignore you, or
I think it depends on who you are.
More say than
Peter
Peter has a lot of say.
No, I can't wait.
I had no say from my illustrator.
I don't have any voices yet.
Yeah. Well, that's a big thing. I think it's very weird, like the process when they pair up the text with an illustrator. A lot of times there is no discussion, and then they also keep you apart. They won't let you. Traditionally, they won't let you talk to each other, and I've broken the rule.
Oh, I've broken that all the time. I like immediately look them up. I'm like,
Yeah.
Facebook, hey!
But going back to audio for a second, this is a really good thing if you've got a story in your shoebox and you're trying to figure out, is it working? Take your iPhone, hit Memo, voice memo, and record your voice. And then if you want to throw it into Audacity, clean it up a little bit, throw some music and sound effects in, it will encourage you greatly. And it will also, when you hear it back in your voice, or you can get a family member or something, but I think it's really eye-opening when you hear it, and you can almost hear where it's stumbling. And also sometimes when you're, just the way you put your words together, it's like, wow, that's a very difficult sentence to read. And I bet a lot of kids and teachers are going to have problems with that too. So
Thank you.
your
Thank you
voice
for the
memo is
question.
your friend.
I love it. Well, thank you everyone for coming as part of the Boston Authors Club. If you haven't signed on our list, we would love to offer you free memberships through the end of the year. We're starting an author gallery on our website, so that's kind of cool that you can have your name in your books there if you're a published author. But we would love anyone. You don't have to be a published author to join.
And it's what I'm on the board. I'm very proud to say of Boston Authors Club, and I was a member for many years, and it's really sailing along really nicely now and growing. And it's a roughly speaking 100-mile radius of Boston, so you can be in Providence, Rhode Island, or Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and you're welcome to join. So, and it's a very supportive group.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. So thank you for coming out
Yeah.
tonight. I hope we
Thank
do
you,
more of these.
everybody.
You guys are